Hello and welcome to Buy Africa, the show where we focus on investment opportunities around the continent. I'm Tshepo, Modiba, and thanks for joining me. Tonight, I'm joined by Japheth Munywoki, Director at Goodson Capital Partners. Japheth, energy is, I guess, it is the lifeblood in terms of any economy, and certainly on the African continent has been a constraint for a lot of sectors. What's broadly been done on the energy front or power generation front?
There are a couple of initiatives in the continent, and one of them is basically the current conversation around Power Africa,
right,
which is a fantastic initiative in my view. It's also fantastic from a funding perspective. Mm-hmm. The other advantage is the technology partners that come with it as well. But I think the key issue for us in the continent is basically due process. Because of course the issues around timelines, the issue around how we handle the entire process in terms of being able to actually run the feasibilities, award those contracts and avoid litigation issues is where we basically have to sort of clean up the process, so to speak. Because it has led to a lot of delays, it has a lot of cost issues as well, and that's basically in terms of the countries as well as also the investors in that particular space.
And I guess when you're looking at the dynamic from country to country, there's nuances to that.
I'll tell you this, I think the nuances, one, start from the political landscape.
Right.
So basically being able to identify and leverage the topologies in the continent is where someone should basically be able to look at. And also there's a big gap in terms of installed capacity for power in most of the African countries, as well as what they're already generating, without even considering growth in terms of demand on a year-on-year basis. Basically, you're able to identify which countries have a huge disparity. Some of the countries, of course, they have, let's say, coal reserves, for example, which is not considered a clean energy, and then there's funding issues for that as well.
Right.
So basically, there's different opportunities in the continent.
You touch on, I guess, the environmental aspect. Does that mean that there's an increasing focus on renewable energy as a source of power?
Look, end of the day, it's a conversation that we need to have. Because renewables are basically the in thing currently.
Right.
Everyone is very happy to move into it and fund it, but it can be used as base load power.
Right.
That conversation has to be very different.
Because it's so expensive.
One, it is expensive, but also in terms of output. It's hard for you to find a 200 megawatt power plant on solar, for example.
Yep.
But it's so easy to have 1,000 megawatts on coal, for example. So you can't use solar as a base load power, and that's where the conversation needs to sort of start.
Right. Let's start with the biggest economy, jump straight to Nigeria. Again, power is a big constraint in terms of that economy. What has been done to resolve the issues there?
The advantage with Nigeria is that they had already worked on the energy sector from a policy standpoint.
Right.
So that has improved in terms of being able to create a foreseeable sort of structure in terms of being able to invest in it.
And that's not likely to change with the political change?
The advantage we have with the current president is that he's working towards having a government that's not tainted with corruption.
Right.
You need to also realize that he knows the oil and gas sector and where it sits, and that includes energy as well. And he's basically saying, listen, if I'm not able to find the right person for this docket, then I'll take it myself. So it will be my responsibility. So that's one of the things. The other things with Nigeria is that there is resources. And basically when I say resources, I'm making reference to lignite. Right. Which can actually basically power a power plant.
Right.
There's opportunities to also do gas as well. So basically, it's something that can be done in a short space. And when I say short space, it's basically from being a shovel-ready project, you're able to basically do it in 36 months. So
And your sense, we touch on that it should be easy to do, or is it likely to be implemented?
Implementation comes with a couple of things. And that's where I go back to the whole entire process in the continent in terms of how do we actually do a power plant from the beginning. One, the government needs to be able to say, listen, here are the potential sites. You need to also be able to provide power evacuation solutions, so the transmission lines, because they're owned by the utilities, and then of course the upgrades to the substations. If that's not done by the government, then basically you can easily do 1 million megawatts and no one will be able to evacuate the power, and that's a problem.
Right. So a few things need to happen before we get there. In terms of funding, are we likely to see good backers for these developments in Nigeria?
You see, the advantage with the investment game is that the morality of the practice is where you look for opportunities that give you the return that you're looking for. So in terms of funding, it's not a problem because you're able to actually fund a project no matter the size. The only issue is, do we have a structure that's certain enough in terms of outlook for an investor to have confidence to put in the money? And are we having reasonable conversations? And by reasonable, I mean, are we going to have tariff escalations or tariff numbers that are sustainable? Because you cannot have an unsustainable number and expect to have an investor who basically comes on board.
Is that one of the key challenges in terms of the continent, this desire by governments to maintain fairly low tariffs?
I think from an investment perspective, it's more of a political gimmick as opposed to a reality. Now the problem is the reality is never as good as the fantasy. So we have to basically be real in terms of expectations, because the investor is looking at profits, but then the populace is looking at the expectations being met. So we have to make sure that those two discussions stay separate. They have to be parallel.
Okay, no, that's fair. So I guess what other investment opportunities, or what are the investment opportunities for businesses and investors looking to take advantage of this theme?
For energy sector?
Yes, in particular.
For energy sector, there are several sort of opportunities for investors. One is basically investing in local manufacturing, which is basically like, for example, your solar panels. I don't think we'll be able to have capacity in the short term, let's say in the next 5 years, where we're able to do turbines in the continent. We'll still have to import, but then end of the day, we're able to actually improve in terms of skill. We're able to actually box clever, and by that I mean, instead of having workshops outside the continent, we're able to actually do workshops on the power plants. So basically that will change the game in terms of skills transfer. And then from a workshop, we're able to graduate to a manufacturing facility because the capability will be there.
Okay. Now, if we move outside of Nigeria and look at the rest of West Africa, what's the dynamic looking like for the region?
You see, there is always a power deficit across the continent because of the issues around investment in that sector. Initially, it was government that was investing in it, until it got to a point where governments could not sustainably manage to even service existing installations. So the conversation moved over to independent power producers. Then, of course, came the whole entire process of how do we set up a framework for it. So in terms of even West Africa as a region, there's shortages on every single country. Look, it's not as bad as some of the countries in the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa, where you basically have close to an average of 8 to 12 hours of power outage on a daily basis.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah, it is ridiculous. It is ridiculous.
Okay, I know we touched on a little bit on Zambia in particular. Your thoughts about that market and the opportunities for power generation?
When it comes to Zambia, in my view, I think Zambia has the capacity to actually do coal-fired power plants. And that's on the back of the resources they have. They have Mamba colliery there, so it's possible to do something. There's also...
With a fairly low cost.
Of course. And also there's opportunities to do solar in that particular market, which of course is a renewable energy source, so it's a fantastic conversation there.
So what are the constraints, particularly in Zambia?
Of course, you need to look at the correlation between currency and falling copper prices.
Okay, and that feeds into the government's ability to fund it.
Because remember, the government now has to fund daily consumption, and with that comes deficits on the current account. So basically, it will be a difficult conversation for government to even guarantee a power purchase agreement. But it's possible to actually do it regardless.
So does that mean that we're likely to have a scenario where we wait for copper prices to recover before you have some sort of traction within Zambia in the
No,
power?
there is already existing conversations, and by that I mean already planned power plants that are already in place. So basically, whether copper prices recover or not, those power plants, I believe, will still be done in the process.
Okay. And again, a similar sector, similar dynamic to Nigeria in terms of funding?
Yeah, definitely. The whole continent is the same.
There's no shortage of people looking to take advantage of this financially.
Yeah, definitely. But the thing is, you know very well, it will be a difficult conversation if you try, let's say from a metric perspective, right? Where you basically committing a whole entire government's budget on one power plant.
Right.
That's unrealistic.
Right. So does that mean that, again, you touched on it a little bit, that you need independent power producers, i.e. an element of privatization of the sector?
You see, with regional integration and with the Southern Africa power pool, which of course we have East African power pool, we have West African power pool as well, we're able to actually produce power from a country that can afford to even guarantee that power and on-sell to the next country. Right. You do not need to actually invest on it.
Okay.
So basically, you can be a consumer.
Perfect. Let's leave it there.
Thank you.
Thanks to my guest, Japheth Munywoki, Director at Goodson Capital Partners. That's all from Buy Africa this week. Remember to follow me on Twitter, that's at Modiba_Tshepo, and send us your thoughts about the show using the hashtag Buy Africa. For myself and the team, goodbye.